Hello, welcome to our webinar for today. My name is Edwina Hill. I'm the Education Officer at Campbelltown Arts Centre. Today I'm joining you from the lands of the Gadigal and Mongol people, and I pay respects to the ongoing custodians of this land. I also acknowledge the Dharawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land where Campbelltown Arts Centre stands, and where this exhibition that we're going to be talking about soon takes place. The Dharawal people's deepening connection to culture and customs have cared for this country for over 60,000 years. We acknowledge elders past, present and future for their immense spiritual connection to this place and this land that was never ceded. Dharawal land has been recognised as a meeting place for people from many lands, and in this spirit we respectfully continue this tradition through the bringing together of our communities through arts and culture. So currently on exhibition and now virtually at Campbelltown Arts Centre, I Am a Heart Beating in the World, Diaspora Pavilion 2 is an exhibition partnership between Foray, Centre for Contemporary Asian Art, International Curators Forum and Campbelltown Arts Centre. It's curated by Adelaide Bannerman, Jessica Taylor and Mikala Tai, and the exhibition considers the navigations, imaginings and lived experiences of 6 artists who belong to the diaspora. These artists are based in the UK, the Caribbean and in Australia. So this is our second of 3 lunchtime artist talks. Today we're joined by Leyla Stevens in conversation with co-curator Mikala Tai. The talks are also Auslan interpreted by Sweeney Interpreting. So today we've got Dane Spencer interpreting. Leyla and Mikala will be in conversation for the next 20 minutes or so. If you have any questions, you can pop them into the Q&A and we'll try to answer them as you go along. I'll navigate around the virtual exhibition tour as we speak, but yeah, you're very welcome to go check it out after today as well. I will hand over to Mikala. Actually, before we start, I might start straight up. So Leyla's work in the exhibition, one of her works in the exhibition is a video work. So I am going to start just so you can see that in its virtual form. So I will just share that. So the title of the work is Our Sea is Always Hungry from 2018. And I'll just play the first 3 minutes to give you a sense.
Ini adalah garis di laut, di mana air dari 2 samudra bertemu, yang dalam dan mengalir deras, membuat ombak-ombak lapar, memakan segala yang ditangkapnya. Gerakan air ini mengalir menjadi perbatasan 2 pulau, keterpisahan geologi, yang membagi flora dan fauna di bumi ini.
Itu sangat puitis.
Ya, aku juga berpikir demikian.
Tetapi mulai dari awal lagi.
Di mana?
Itu tentang petani yang tinggal bersama hantu-hantu.
Tidak di situ awalnya. Awalnya adalah di sumur yang dalam, dengan 7 mayat, dan buaya yang tidak lihat siapa.
Tidak, kamu harus ke belakang lagi.
Dimulai di kekerasan kependudukan wilayah, mencuri buah pala dan cengkeh.
Ya, bisa itu awalnya. Tetapi buat saya dimulai di tahun 1963, saat Agung marah karena ketidakseimbangan yang ada di dunia kita dan meletuskan segalanya seperti yang kita ketahui.
Saya dengar mereka datang ke rumah korban, milisi itu, dan membawa mereka dengan truk.
Iya, mereka pasukan pembunuh yang spesial.
Mereka memiliki daftar nama di setiap area, dan jika namamu ada di daftar itu, mereka akan mendatangimu.
Aku pernah mendengar satu orang.
Lebih baik diceritakan dalam bahasa Bali.
Nah, tae nasane ningah no.
Thanks for joining us. My name is Mikala Tai and I'm one of the co-curators of the exhibition. And I'm joining today from the beautiful lands of the Gadigal people. And I'm really taking some time to thank elders past, present and emerging for their custodianship of the lands, which are really supporting us through these trying times. I'm delighted today to be joined by the artist Leyla Stevens. I've loved Leyla's work for a very long time, and this exhibition was a really great moment for us to start working together. And her involvement in the Diaspora Pavilion was from a really, really robust discussion with my co-curators, Jessica Bannerman and Adelaide Bannerman and Jessica Taylor, who have been working on the idea of the Diaspora Pavilion for over a decade. This research project, an exhibition project and presenting project has been about really interrogating what does diaspora mean. And by this very complex partnership that we've got that goes overseas and many continents, really enables us to have a conversation about what does diaspora mean from an Australian perspective and what does this Australian perspective mean in global terms. And Leyla's work really spoke to this, and we were really delighted that she came on board and in particular was able to show these two works, this one video work that we've just had a snippet of, but also an earlier photographic work that she'd only ever shown in Indonesia. And Safe Passage is a diptych that we'll have a little look at when we're going through the virtual tour. But I thought, Leyla, to start, when we started thinking about what diaspora means and what was really interesting about your work in this context was this idea of how memory works and how when you've moved and there's been a journey from one place to another, this is sometimes happens by your generation, but sometimes it happens by your parents, your grandparents. And you hear about this movement and the stories and the reasons through family tales, through the need to reiterate stories. But also there's a little gap in all of that where you kind of imagine and make leaps yourself about how things happened. So I'll be really keen for you to share with us how that thinking has been worked into your practice, in particular this work.
Yeah, thank you, Mikala. And yes, also wanting to pay respects to the land I'm on today, Gadigal and Wongal land of the Eora Nation, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and a warm welcome to any First Nations people with us today. Yeah, so this, just picking up on that idea of journeys and memory, like this whole project sort of started with me kind of really looking at my family's I guess home village in South Bali, and exploring these kind of traces from the 1965 genocide that happened across Indonesia. But it was also a way for me to kind of I guess engage with some place that was quite familiar to me, so South Bali, but through these points that I actually didn't know. So, like I guess it was before, kind of learning about how this history sort of operated or was remembered specifically in Bali and through a Balinese perspective, it was really quite abstract to me. Like it was part of this sort of Indonesia's national history, and it wasn't sort of connected to, you know, I think through, you know, starting the research for this project, I actually got to connect it to, you know, actual people I knew and an actual place that I knew. So it started off with me kind of actually looking at sites of mass graves in South Bali, and a lot of it's kind of underneath this really touristed topography. So a lot of times you'll just be engaging with something like a hotel or a villa, a private villa, where you know there's a sort of site that's whispered about. But also part of that initial research was just to talk to people and survivors from this time and listen to people's stories, really. And what kind of came up in that initial learning for me was just this huge discrepancy between people's memories of this time and what's actually being talked about or acknowledged or legitimized on the surface. So really became the whole, you know, especially with this film, this film is like part of a iteration of films that engage with the same subject, but this was an earlier iteration. And with this one in particular, I was sort of really looking at that discrepancy, I guess, and focusing on that kind of gap of knowledge around the landscape in South Bali and how you have these points of erasure where you don't know what's happening or has happened in that space. You have literally buried history that's not been talked about. And you know, these sites are really ordinary. Like you walk through them and it doesn't, you know, what's the sort of brutality of the past is not registering in the present. And I think that's what I wanted to sort of think about for this film. But yeah, like a lot of it kind of started from this one place I was looking at, which was like just like a place, like a sort of intersection, really. I drive through all the time when I'm in South Bali, and it was only through my father's, you know, stories about this place that I sort of found out there was actually a large mass grave there, and he witnessed this being made as a boy, and like it doesn't look like anything. It's just a parking lot, but there is a huge banyan tree there, and so like I made a lot of work sort of responding to the tree because that's such a visible signal in that landscape. But yeah, so this project was really kind of thinking about that, you know, I guess ways to tell the history now, but also with that narrative I had, you know, between these two voices, also commenting on this like really sustained forgetting around that history. Like it's not this kind of really straightforward remembering that they narrate. And they also, you know, I wanted to kind of resist this idea of a story as a sort of forward moving progression. So they sort of connect with these different points in time and different kind of counterpoint histories and things that don't seem connected, but also kind of sort of questioning, I guess, how this history is to be told now.
Yeah, I think the idea of amnesia and the way that, you know, the burying, the actual like bitumening and making of a car park over these really important sites, and kind of in some ways disfiguring the truth or disfiguring what happened through something really banal, because you never look twice at a car park. It is the car park. There's no marker, no nothing. It's really becomes poignant, I think, through your really sort of lingering gaze through the camera on, you know, challenging the viewers and challenging all of us to look again and to look for longer at things that may seem to be really every day, because there's a whole lot of layers that go beneath that. And I also like that you use the word, you know, whisper. You heard whisperings of, and then in the voices they're saying, you know, I heard. So this idea of the truth and like being able to tie it down is lost, and it becomes this kind of slippery thing that you only hear if you ask the right questions. And I think your work kind of poses this or challenges us to think, are we asking the right questions and are we looking hard enough. And have you had that kind of response to people? Have you found that those in the area, you know, that go around this banyan tree, have they seen the work, and what was their response?
Yeah, it's like it's still very much an unfinished project for me because I haven't been able to exhibit it properly in Bali, which is, you know, really the intended audience. But, you know, we're just hoping when international travel is again possible, that's going to be a possibility. But I think like it's so hard, and it almost becomes a little bit strange talking about this project from Australia because it's such a different topic when you bring it up in Bali. Like it's still such this, there's still such a heaviness around it and a reluctance to speak through certain ideas and I think say there's, you know, it's that, I think that focus on truth telling that sort of, there was, you know, there's been such strong kind of artists responding to this history and activism and you know, scholarship on 65, and I don't think now is in this sort of really short space we have time to go into it. You know, since the fall of Suharto, and I think there's been some amazing work and artists really speaking, artists who come from survivor histories, you know, family members being killed, talking about that in their work. But for me, you know, I think what I was trying to do is maybe sort of kind of think about the potential of an artwork as a reparative moment. Like, you know, you can focus on the brutality, but you can also sort of start to think about how we might even possibly have this mode of reconciliation as well. And possible modes of healing. So that, I guess that was the sort of, you know, it's like the sort of slipperiness of it, of the topic when you speak about it in Bali. It is all sort of whispered about, and it's still sort of like heavily stigmatized. But I think it's so important to start to also think about, yeah, ways to deal with that intergenerational trauma that's there.
And I guess, you know, following on from that, do you feel that maybe this work could only be made like now? It couldn't have been made probably 10 years ago. And it actually, there's some things and some work that only the diaspora who are not physically there every day can make. It needs that lens. And for you to have that ability to zoom in on being in South Bali with your family in the town, but also to come back and be in Australia at distance to that. Does that help you think through these things in both an artistic way, but also in a historical, in a responsibility in terms to your family and that history as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I'm making over distance a lot of times, like even though a lot of the sort of initial research or production happens in South Bali, you know, a lot of the actual, you know, bringing it all together happens in Australia. Like it's just really, it's so defined through my own position, this work, you know, the making of it. And, you know, and there's always that sort of questioning, the sort of ethics around, you know, what you are allowed, you know, whose stories are you allowed to tell, and how my work is read in Indonesia and my own position there. But I think what it allowed me to, absolutely, I don't think I could have made, or I don't think this kind of work could have been made 10 years ago. I think there's something that's specific about being able to make this work through distance, physical distance, but also, you know, that time that we've had since 65. And also, you know, this work is really also really informed by these kind of counterpoint histories around early tourism in Bali. You know, like I was looking at early surf tourism that was happening in the 70s. And we sort of consider that as being almost happening in parallel to these these massacres that were happening. But the kind of imagery that was happening from those early surf tourism, discovery narratives, I kind of call them, they're lasting, that they're really sustained. These sustained imagery we have a Bali of as, beautiful island paradise. And so that's kind of what I wanted to bring into this work, was this sort of dominant narrative we have of Bali and where it came from. And I think, though, there's this sort of attention on Bali's colonial history. I also think that kind of, early Western tourism is actually really kind of interesting to look at as well, because I think I guess that's the version of Bali that most of Australians are really familiar with as well.
I'm very aware that we've only got a few minutes left, and there's a whole group of students from Campbelltown TAFE who are visual arts students. So I was just wondering if maybe for these last 2 minutes or so, you could just talk us through actually how you produce this. Is there a film team? What do you use? Do you shoot it all? Do you edit it all back in Australia? Like, what's the actual process in 2 minutes?
Okay, yeah. I work with a small team of collaborators. So for this work, I shot a lot of it myself, but I also worked with a really wonderful videographer or cinematographer in Bali called Waya Martino. And I also worked with collaborators who are performers, but also research collaborators as well. Like, something like film, you can't make it in a silo. Like, it's such a collaboration across many different areas of production. Yeah, so I don't know how much time we have, but like, my background is coming from a photographic background, which you can see a lot in the way these shots are made. A lot of them sort of operate as a kind of moving photograph, really. And so a lot of my image making is the setup is quite simple. But I think it's interesting to see this work now and where my kind of approach to moving images now. Because I think now I'm starting to move into kind of more, I guess, multi-channel work, and the production level has gone up a little bit. But there's something to, I think this work really speaks to maybe my more photographic roots, because I use things like I sort of collage images together. I'm kind of thinking about, that's good timing there. Like, I'm really interested in, like, kind of referencing images that are also imagined and sustained through these kind of representations we have online, through history, through archives, through collections. Like, they're citational, these landscapes. They're deliberately kind of abstracted to not show a specific place, but they're citing something that people already have in their imagination or through history. So yeah, that was kind of my approach to image making in this work.
Well, that was our short and sweet, I think, half an hour race through your work. We didn't even have a second to even look at Safe Passage, but maybe we can just talk quickly. That is a photographic series that you did when you were there. That kind of looked at a different kind of tract of family history, and sort of joining both sides of your family history into sort of one ongoing story.
Yeah, so Safe Passage was actually came about through an artist residency I was doing in Jogja at Chemedi House, or Chemedi Art House, and it was an amazing time, and it was, and at the time I was really kind of looking at my Australian side of the family. My grandfather, who was a lighthouse keeper, who worked in lighthouses and signal stations up and down the New South Wales coastline. And so when I got to Jogja, I got kind of interested in these lighthouses that were still remaining around central Java, because there were sort of, there were these colonial structures and how they were you know, continued to be looked after now, and it's still operated in. So I kind of started to visit some of these lighthouses and just, you know, collect stories from lighthouse keepers. And what I found was that it had a sort of a really different kind of, it was a really different kind of job in Java. So it was more like a lot of itinerant workers were looking after these spaces. And so I started to collect their stories. And one of the stories I came across was, you know, to ward off tiger attacks in this very kind of remote location, lighthouse keepers would wear masks on the back of their heads. So I don't know how exaggerated it was, but it was just one of these images that really stuck with me. So these two photographs was sort of a restaging of this story that I heard. But as you say, it was sort of a really, it's kind of interesting to think about in retrospect how I ended up making this work by thinking through my Australian history in Java. Like it's, yeah.
I think that's kind of very symptomatic of the diaspora experience, that you are always somewhere but thinking through something else, and that like space and time collapses through that thinking. But thank you so much for taking some time to share with us today. It is so great being able to talk about these works, and we're devastated that people are not able to see them in the flesh. It's a little bit meta looking at video via online video talk machine. So the irony is not lost on us all, but we do hope that it does open before the end of October and everyone else is able to see it. But thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Before we head off, I'd just like to say, obviously, thank you for our amazing presenters. And Mikala will be back next week with Daniela. Yohannes is the last of our lunchtime artist talks. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.